Hey everyone, I'm back with another tutorial, but this time it's a charcoal one, showing you how to do black curly fur that you see in this poodle drawing that I've commissioned to do recently. We're going to be working in white charcoal today on black paper. I'm using a white General's charcoal pencil, and then the black paper, well, it's a black card, is Frisk. And it's like a black card, and you can buy that on Amazon. It's A3 size, what I'm working on. I've also used Clairefontaine Noir, the paint on one, for mixed media use, and that's very similar to this paper, so you could use either of them. They're both just as nice as each other, and the charcoal pencil goes onto them really nice. So at the moment you can just see that I'm adding strokes to represent where the hair is, the curls of hair and the strands of hair and things like that. I'm just getting it all laid down. Just try to use your reference photo in a generalised way when you're doing this, because you don't want to try and make every single last curl and everything exactly the same as the photo, because it'll just not work very well. So you just need to look at your reference photo, get a general idea of how things are, and then just put that onto paper in your own way, so to speak. So you're just getting the general kind of look rather than getting everything exact. There might be some specific conspicuous clumps of hair and things like that that you might want to try and copy a little bit more from photo, especially if it's a commission, a private commission of someone's pet. But you don't need to get every single strand of hair or every tiny little curl exactly the same as reference photo. You can see on its ears, the hair near the top of the ear is a lot straighter, just a slight wave to it, a little bit more frizzy, and then near base of ears it's a lot curlier. And now I'm working on its chest, and the curls quite often are like in rows. So you'll see these little rows that I'm doing, they're not all uniform, you know, like just lines all the way down its chest. They can sort of be a bit slanted and things like that. And you'll also notice that I'm not curling all the hairs in the same direction, because they do curl in different directions. I do a few less in middle at chest because there's a darker area in middle at chest, where there's a lot more black showing through. And then in other areas it's a lot lighter, so I do an higher concentration of hair curls and lines and things like that. So now I'm coming in with a blending stump, and I'm just going to go over all of this with blending stump and just smoothing it all out. And I'm just going to move the blending stump in the direction that the hairs are growing, you know, so that along the hair shafts. The idea is to soften the strokes a little bit, because when you just put the charcoal on, they look quite harsh, so you want to soften it up some. And also you're creating like a bloom, which is going to fill in some of the black in between, which will just give it a softer and fluffier look overall. I have a soft paintbrush that I also use for this kind of work, and you'll see me briefly use it a bit later, but it has a slightly different effect to blending stump. It causes more of a subtle bloom, but it doesn't affect the strokes of the hair as much, so they stay a little bit more intact. Whereas I want to soften this fur a lot more in this instance, which is why I'm using this blending stump and not the brush. And I don't want quite as much bloom as what the brush causes either. So now I'm using a kneaded eraser, and the reason being is that when I've done the work with the blending stump, it looks a little bit more like a grey dog as opposed to a black dog. So now I've got to darken things down a little bit again, and I'm focusing mostly on the gaps and what have you between these curls and these rows of curls and things like that. I prefer to use a kneaded eraser for this, because if you use a normal eraser it leaves little bits and what have you everywhere, and trying to wipe them off on a charcoal drawing is just not going to work out very well. You're going to end up with charcoal everywhere. So a kneaded eraser works absolutely fine for this, and don't leave any bits and what have you. There'll be areas where you need to use your kneaded eraser a little bit more, you know, like your darker areas and what have you. Make them strokes and them markings that you've already done a little bit more subtle. And then there's other areas where you just take it easy with it, because you want it to stay a little bit lighter. You want to try and keep it pretty random. You don't want to be too uniform, otherwise it'll just not look very natural. So have a look at your reference photo to see where you've got your dark areas and your light areas, and use it as a general reference. You don't have to be perfectly exact. So here you see me come in with my paintbrush, and I'm just going to get a little dab over it and smoothen it a little bit more. Because I've already been over it with a blending stump, there won't be as much loose charcoal to move around with brush this time, and also because I've already been over it with a kneaded eraser, which will have removed a lot of dust as well. I did have to spend a little time on this one, going back and forth between kneaded eraser and blending stump, because it were a little bit light in the beginning and I wanted to darken it down enough so that it did look like a black dog and not a grey dog. The number of times you switch back and forth at this stage would just depend on what effect you wanted to get at the end of it all. I'm still going to be adding the highlights on, so this is basically just creating the darker under fur. Obviously on a black dog you don't want to be going overboard with highlights anyway, otherwise it'll just end up looking like a grey dog again. So here I'm just going to be using a little bit of black charcoal just to emphasise a few of them dark gaps and things like that, and a few dark details that you can't get with a kneaded eraser. I really tried not to use much black charcoal on these drawings. It's quite often inevitable that you'll use a little bit, but just try and keep it to a minimum as much as you can. You can sort of see where black charcoal is because the way light's shining on paper and it makes it stand out. It looks a lot more matte than the actual paper, a lot darker. But you'll not always be able to see that from every angle, especially when it's like up on a wall and framed up and everything. So I've come back with white charcoal now to do these highlights, and I'm just going to start on ears. Again, you've got your straighter, just wavy hair on top of ear, and then you've got your curlier hairs at bottom of ear. You don't want to be covering up everything underneath. You want to be a little bit more sparing with highlights, because there's only going to be certain parts of hairs that actually catch the light in that way, so rest of hair is just going to look darker. If you go overboard with highlights, you'll just end up with a dog that looks like a pale coloured dog rather than a black dog. It does look a little bit lighter on this footage. It's really difficult to record these white on black drawings. When I'm photographing them, I can underexpose camera so that they don't come out too bright, which they will if I don't use exposure compensation on camera. They will come out too bright because the full camera. But when you're doing the footage, especially since I'm having to do it with my phone, where I can't use exposure compensation to do the footage, I have to put up with it being a little bit overexposed, and then I just try to alter it a little bit when I'm doing the video editing. But it never looks quite like what it does in real life. So I just keep working with this until it looks like how I want it to look. If you need to come back in with blending stump just to soften the highlights down a little bit again, at kneaded eraser, just to darken down a little bit again, and then come back in with charcoal. You can do that as many times as you need to until you get the effect that you want. Just going to add a few wispy hairs at top of ear. There were quite a few flyaway strands that were sticking out and what have you at top of ears. You can also use opportunity to add some new strands at this stage, some lighter ones that go over top of everything else. Just it helps to add a little bit of extra depth, because everything underneath it is a bit dark, so it's pushed back, and then when you add a new light strand on top, it pulls it forward. So I think we're just about done with that now. I hope that you've enjoyed it and that you got a little bit something from it. I know the charcoal videos don't seem to get as much attention as the acrylic painting videos. I obviously do get a lot more charcoal drawing orders, and they are quicker to do, so it's just a good opportunity to film something and be able to post it on here, and I might tap into them charcoal people a little bit more one day. So let me know what you think in comments below, and if you're new here and you want to see more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like my video and what have you, because it's all helpful to my channel, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!